Well, I told you guys I would be on the podcast today, a special NFL TGIF edition of a Q&A where yours truly, Ryan Thomas, answers the questions from you, the viewers and the listeners of the show. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in, very much so, and submitting all your questions. This was kind of a little bit short notice, right? I just hopped on my social media and I just actually looked into, maybe doing this morning, but the questions came in. They came in fast and furious, pun intended. Just saw Fast X last Friday, and I'm gonna say I liked it. I enjoyed it. I'm sorry. I understand what those movies represent, what those movies mean, and I'm not against it. So if they want to make another one, looks like they're making another one. Looks like they're making two more Fast and Furious movies. I'm not opposed to it. So with that being said, I'm going to get right to your questions as far as this Q&A goes. And of course, I'll be sure to answer any questions that you guys ask me live on the Facebook stream as you guys are tuning in right now, as well. Anyone that's tuning in on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook and or YouTube channel, please feel free to fire away any questions in the comments section below wherever you're tuning in, as I love to answer the questions from the people that tune into the show. It's been very fun, and this has been a really cool idea, really cool concept that has allowed my viewers and listeners to interact with me, obviously a little bit more than they normally do. So the first question comes from Joshua Williams on the original Fire Away Some Questions for today's NFL Q&A, of course, presented by the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. He asks, is Coach McDermott number 22 ranking of the coaches a fair assessment? Now, I'm not sure who put this ranking together, but it's not the first time that I had heard about this, but it will be the first time that I have addressed it on this show. 22 ranking. We had a few people chime in, say that that's too high of a ranking for Sean McDermott, which I do believe that's a little bit disrespectful. But to be quite fair, top 15 coach easily. To be quite fair, top 10 coach, as he's put his team in the playoffs year after year after year after year. The question is, can he get them over the hump? Can he get them from beyond the NFL divisional round, from beyond the AFC championship into, of course, the Super Bowl? And until that happens, and the longer it takes for that to happen, it's only going to be harder for Sean McDermott to weather the storm of criticism that has come his way over the years. And I understand it completely that the criticism of McDermott is something that I definitely feel like is warranted, especially these last few years. And that criticism stems from going forward on fourth down, not going forward on fourth down, not being aggressive enough, situational, clock management issues that we've seen, not just in the playoffs, but in the regular season as well. And now with this season coming up, obviously, I think one of the biggest storylines that I was asked about last week is the fact that Sean McDermott is actually going to be calling the defense as well as being the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And that's something that he hasn't done. He hasn't called a defense in quite some time. Leslie Frazier was the guy that was, calling, quote unquote, the defense, but it was McDermott's defense. So, in all honesty, I think there is more pressure on Sean McDermott this year than any other season before. The clock is ticking on this team getting to the Super Bowl and winning a Super Bowl. You got to get there in order to win it, and they've come up short in their bid to get there. Good buddy of mine, Ronnie Smith, fired away quite a few comments, and I'm happy to answer all of them for Ronnie. One of them I already kind of gave a short answer to, but he's coming at me saying, why do you let Bill's bias keep you from seeing you're the third most talented team in your division? So I'm curious to maybe fire a question back at Ronnie. Who does he believe is the most talented team in the AFC East? I think I would assume that he would give that billing to the Miami Dolphins. Then maybe with the addition of Aaron Rodgers going to the New York Jets, Ronnie believes that the Jets are the second most talented team in the division. Maybe that's not how he sees it, but that I'm assuming there that's how he sees it. Maybe he sees the Jets as more talented than the Dolphins. That's a question that I throw back at Ronnie. Which team does he see as the most talented team in the division? That is the AFC East, of course. But let's put it to you this way, okay? Not necessarily Bills bias when you're bringing back the same band that's done it before in terms of getting from point A to point B. They just need to get from point A to point B, and the next point C, I guess you could say, would be to get to the Super Bowl. And Miami has not done those things yet. They've not played in an AFC championship game in quite some time. The New York Jets haven't made the playoffs in quite some time. So on paper, yes, while those teams on paper look more talented, the National Football League, as we know, Ronnie, is not fantasy football. It's one in the trenches, game plan, obviously schematics, offensively and defensively. And nobody has done that better in the AFC East these last 3-4 seasons than the Buffalo Bills, as to why the Bills have won that division, years in a row. And until somebody can go toe-to-toe with the Bills in that department, which the Jets showed glimpses that they could, to your point, Miami has shown glimpses that they can. But when it really comes down to it, when it matters most, both teams did come up short against the Bills. And maybe that will change for the reasons that I think Ronnie believes both teams are more talented than the Buffalo Bills. But I say, in terms of talent and winning, talent doesn't necessarily always win games. What does win games is a team, a united team. And I do think the Bills are that. I think that's pretty evident by just everything that they'd gone through last season, and they still won 13 games. I think that says a lot about the team and where they're at in terms of, obviously moving forward. And a lot of people within the league believe that the Bills had as best an offseason as anybody, especially when they did not have the cap room to do so. I'm not even going to go there and say that they had, the best offseason in comparison to anybody. But I thought they had a very good offseason in comparison to what I thought they would, to be quite honest. Just based on the additions that they were able to make, despite the cap situation being something that was not in their favor, right? So a lot of people are rating the Dolphins and the Jets higher than the Bills, and I think that's due to the fact that there's just so many new pieces to talk about with those teams that everybody's kind of sleeping on the Bills because the Bills are, yet again, the same team. I don't necessarily take that as a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, that their nucleus is strong. The nucleus is there, where their nucleus has zero question marks around it. There's no question marks with Josh Allen. There's no question marks with Stephon Diggs. And there is question marks with Tua. There is question marks with Aaron Rodgers, to be quite honest with you. If you were to look at these last few years, he has not looked like the MVP previously in previous seasons. And he's 40, and he's not a 40-year-old Tom Brady or a 40-year-old Brett Favre. He's a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers. And I think there is a difference there. And I think Aaron Rodgers knows that, which, I even contemplated it last week. Maybe that darkness retreat was not necessarily something that he did to check to see if he's willing to play again. It's something he did to check to see if he believes in his heart of hearts, if his body is ready, willing, and able to allow him to play again. Something very different. So answering that question there, not necessarily Bill's bias. I just believe in the nucleus of that team far more than that of the Dolphins or the Jets. Not to say that those teams aren't getting better. They definitely are. But I believe in the Bills nucleus more. And that's not bias. That's just honest, truth. I do believe in Allen. I do believe in Diggs. And I think their team is going to be a lot different than what we've seen in recent years, especially offensively. And I think it'll be for the better based on the addition of Dalton Kincaid And I really expect the run game to be much better. And we'll talk about that, obviously, with some other questions that I was asked during this Q&A. All right, so moving on to the next one, Ronnie asks, will Glenn Dorsey, I think he means Ken Dorsey, will Ken Dorsey be able to contain super high Josh Allen, or will you continue to ride the passer rating roller coaster? And I think this goes to the question that I kind of just touched on. A lot of times these last 2 seasons, I'd say, Allen was a quarterback that felt like he needed to do everything and anything to kind of help that team win, right? When things didn't go well, it turned into, man, I need to make this hero play, make this hero ball mentality into what brings us to a victory. And I think this offseason, more than any other, is evident that the Bills recognize that. Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, they realized, number one, we need to build around this kid. We need to do more to build around him, meaning the offensive line, protecting him, not putting his body in a position to take years off of his career. Some of those were decisions that he's made, but those decisions were decisions he had to make based on the offensive line not being what it needed to be, as well as the fact that they did add to this team weaponry. Dalton Kincaid, Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy, those 3 guys I do expect to have their own impact on this team offensively, as well as Damian Harris. And I think the key with this, Ronnie, is the fact that the Bills have to be able to establish a run game. They have to be able to have a counterbalance between the pass game and the run game, especially as we get into those winter months, Ronnie, of November, December, January. You want to play in those months and play meaningful football in those months. And if you want to do that, you have to be able to establish the pass and the run. And I think Damian Harris is a big addition to this team. And I don't necessarily believe he's the RB1. I do think that title belongs to James Cook, but I think there could be more times this year that as the season comes to a close, we'll look at Damian Harris's game and we'll say, man, he had a lot of clutch runs for this Buffalo Bills team in comparison to James Cook, because James Cook is that, split through speedster type guy, where Damian Harris is the battering ram that the Bills have not had at the running back position since Marshawn Lynch. So Fred Jackson as well. So we need that type of guy, especially in Buffalo, playing in Buffalo, to do what he does best. And anytime Damian Harris played in Buffalo, I don't think it's a coincidence that anytime he played in Buffalo, he played really, really well. So I think there was a reason for that. I think he's one of those backs that just fits the time of year that the Buffalo Bills need to have that run game honestly firing on all cylinders. So Ronnie then asks a question that I agree with him on fully in regards to the schedule. And I talked about this obviously during the schedule breakdown, but we'll break it down again in terms of the Buffalo Bills schedule. And he asks the question that if the Buffalo Bills have Von Miller available and healthy for the 2023 season, of course, what stops them from going 8-0? And let's go to the schedule here. I want to pull this up here for everybody. So we will go to the schedule and we'll take a look at this here. So going to the schedule here, what would stop them from going 8-0? Obviously, you have the New York Jets week 1, the Las Vegas Raiders week 2, the Washington, who knows what they'll be called, week 3. Then you have the Miami Dolphins week 4. Week 5, you have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Week 6, you have the New York Giants. 7, New England Patriots. Week 8, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, to be honest with Ronnie, I predicted when we went back and looked at this schedule, I predicted that the Buffalo Bills would win their first 8 games. They would win their first 8 games. And I think that The schedule is extremely difficult, by the way, but it's not necessarily within the first 8 weeks of the season. And everything I've followed as closely as I possibly can in regards to the return of Von Miller this year, I do believe he will be back week 1. I do think that he can make a comeback week 1 and make a difference week 1. So that I do believe will happen, Ronnie. I do believe that the Bills will go 8-0 to start the season and can, at the very worst, maybe 6-2, 7-1. I look at the Jets and the Dolphins, obviously, week 1 and week 3 as massive tests early for the team. Those are massive games. Those divisional games are always massive, but to play them early in your season, those are going to be pivotal. Those are going to be crucial. How those games turn out will really, really impact this Buffalo Bills team. If they somehow come away losing both of those games, that would dramatically hurt their team in the early portion of the season. But I don't think that that's going to happen. I really don't. I do feel confident that they can win their first 8. So, Ronnie did ask the question about the run game. We touched on that. In terms of, will the Bills actually work the run game for a full 4 quarters one time this year? Will they continue to give up on it and wonder why no one can get open when the defense doesn't have to play honest? I think this is going to be a much more balanced offense this year. I pray to God that it is, Ronnie. I'm with you, in terms of that. I hope that it is. If it's not, we'll see what happens in terms of that. We will know what happens in terms of that, as you alluded to. We'll see more of the same, and it might be potentially even worse based on what we've known to see these last couple of years, even with Dable. I mean, this is one of my biggest criticisms of Brian Dable, was that he did not lead a balanced offensive passing attack, and I hoped that that would be seen more with Dorsey last year, as I fully endorsed, pun intended, Ken Dorsey last season to be their offensive coordinator, and I hoped that we'd see some different things. I think this is the year we'll see that rather than last year. It feels like last year was too much of a state of transition, and we had to kind of wait that out a little bit more than what we thought, and maybe this year we'll see better things ahead. Eric Ellis, he asks me, what do the Bills have to do to get back to winning games without giving their fans heart attacks? Well, I hate to break it to Eric, but I don't think in our lifetime, Eric, that we will ever see that not happen. The Bills will be the Bills. At some point this season, I know that, I'm aware of that. This won't be all sunshine and rainbows, because the world is not. I know that there will be games where the Bills will be the Bills. And what I mean by that is be their own worst enemy. And to be honest with you, as I've talked about with Eric a bunch of times, as he's a good buddy of mine, as you guys know, the Bills are their own worst enemy. They always have been. And part of me believes, unfortunately, that in some cases they always will be. And I don't want to say that, but that does seem to be the case sometimes. And even Dawson Knox said the only team that's going to beat us is ourselves. We feel confident going into any matchup against anybody, and they should. Because unlike Ronnie's point, I believe that this is the most talented team in the NFL, to be quite honest. They have most talented quarterback, a quarterback that really can do things that nobody else can do outside of Pat Mahomes, maybe, but even in comparison. There's things that Allen can do that nobody else can do, in my opinion. Stephon Diggs has been one of the best wide receivers in the NFL his whole career. I mean, from start to now, to present day, he has not taken his foot off the gas in any year. There were some moments where things were a little bit turbulent in Minnesota, but the numbers were still the numbers. They were still Stephon Diggs numbers. So, that nucleus, that combo above all, is an end all be all force to be reckoned with. And, I'd hope that this year they minimize that. For a team that lost 3 games last year, those 3 games they lost by what was like a combined 7 points or something like that, 9 points, something crazy. So I don't have it in front of me, but I do know the games that they lost. They lost to the Miami Dolphins by 2. They lost to the New York Jets by 3, and they lost to the Vikings by 3. So I do now have it in front of me. Miami, they lost 19-21. That's a 2-point loss. Jets, they lost 17-20. That's a 3-point loss. 5 points, 8 points. They lost 3 games by 8 points combined. I mean, outside of that, this team would have went undefeated and undisputed outside of the Week 17 game with Damar Hamlin. That turned into a no contest, of course, as we're all aware of. But really think on that. For all the flaws that we did see with this team, they only lost 3 games by a combined 8 points. Without Von Miller from week 12 to the end of the year to the divisional round. So without Von Miller for 7-8 weeks. Let's really think of that, right? Let's really think of that with all the shit that this team went through last year, which there was a lot of it. Starting with the Matt Araiza situation, which I have not talked about that on this podcast yet, and I will very soon. In terms of the latest developments within that, with all that they went through, they still were able to maintain a solid season, right? So, to Eric's question. He's talking about the game aspect of it. Those losses were pitiful. Watching those games, momentary lapse of judgment, multiple times by guys on that field. Isaiah McKenzie in the game against the Miami Dolphins. I thought the play call to sneak it at the 1-yard line against Minnesota was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. And I was flabbergasted by it when it was happening. And then when it happened, you know what I mean? It was just seeing it before it happened, thinking somebody fumbles here, that's a touchdown. I don't know why they're doing this. I remember saying that specifically to the people I was watching the game with at the time, and it happened. It was terrible. And then the Jets game, they just fell flat. That was the game where they just came up. They came to the stadium in East Rutherford, and they just were not there. That's going to happen with every single team that is in the National Football League. Kansas City lost to the Indianapolis Colts last season. So then they went on to win a Super Bowl. So those things are going to happen, but the Bills will be Bills in moments this year. Unfortunately for Eric and myself, I don't think the Bills' heart attacks or the Bills' heart attack scares will ever stop. We're just that invested. Kyle Huffnagel, he's a New York Jets fan, so I knew he was going to ask me a question that related to the Jets, and I'm okay with it. Being that this is an NFL TGIF Q&A, and I believe, everybody knows that I'm a Bills fan, and everybody knows that I cover the team on this podcast, but I'm a football fan more than anything, and I do tell it like it is. Do I believe that the Bills should be in the Super Bowl this year? Yes, I said that. I'll say that this year. I said that last year, said it the year before that, and to be quite honest with you, I was not wrong in that take. They just came up short. They should have been in those games. They should have played in those games. They didn't. They beat the Chiefs, who won the Super Bowl last year, and they lost in 13 seconds to the Chiefs, who went on to lose to Cincinnati. And then obviously last year, the Bills lose to Cincinnati. So wondering where they stand now more than ever, this season will dictate that. So Kyle Huffnagel, though, getting to his question, he asks, how good do you think the Jets are going to be with the addition of Aaron Rodgers? Do you think he will be healthy? Do you think Aaron will stop being a bitch? Pardon my French. Well, there's a lot to that question. Let's start off with how good do you think the Jets are going to be with the addition of Aaron Rodgers? Now, as I said, talent doesn't make a team, and one addition doesn't make a team. It's going to take Aaron Rodgers and the rest of the team to get to where they need to go and to get to where they want to go. And Jets fans have every reason to be as excited as they are, because the Jets have not had a good quarterback since Joe Namath, and one that's at the top of his at the top of his game. And you go back, I mean, I make jokes about it all the time with people. You go back and you look at the stat sheet of Joe Namath, it's pitiful in comparison to the stats that the quarterback's putting up. Now, a different era, of course, I'm aware of that, but it's just funny. You know what I mean? I just find that, kind of funny. Everyone says how great he was, and he was, but the stats are horrible. Just as many touchdowns as interceptions, but it was a different time, different game. I won't throw shade at Broadway Joe. I will give shine to a previous quarterback in the New York Jets that I have always liked and did like when he was in his quote unquote prime with the New York Jets. And that's Chad Pennington. I always liked him. I always thought, man, it's unfortunate he had those injuries with his elbow, with his shoulder. He was pretty good when he was healthy, when he was young and healthy. I thought he was pretty good. He was the first quarterback drafted in the draft class that saw Tom Brady get picked. He was the first one out of the Brady Six, and he was a good quarterback. When he was healthy, he was decent. I don't think he gets a lot of credit, but it's largely due to the fact that he couldn't stay healthy. But when he was good. I thought when he was healthy, he was good. Sidebar conversation there for another time. But going to this, of course, do I think Aaron Rodgers will be healthy? That's a question that I need a crystal ball to answer that. But what I do think is this, in terms of Aaron Rodgers, I think that this is a guy that, unlike Peyton Manning when he went from the Colts to the Broncos, unlike Tom Brady when he went from the Patriots to the Bucks, and unlike even Brett Favre when he went from the Packers to the Vikings, all three of those guys, it is not debatable now, and it never will be debatable. Those guys still wanted to play. They did not kind of wish-wash whether or not they were going to continue to play. Aaron Rodgers did that for the better part of 3 years. He really did. Not maybe necessarily publicly, but I think internally he questioned whether he should keep playing based upon, going the distance that he would go each and every year with Green Bay when they weren't that talented and leading them only as far as he could just to come up short. That is deflating. It truly is. I get that. But the last year and a half, it felt like he was kind of holding the Packers hostage with his decisions as far as what he was going to do. And he finally made the decision that I'm going to go on this darkness retreat to decide whether or not I want to play. And a part of me, as I alluded to earlier, part of me wonders if that darkness retreat was not necessarily to discover whether or not he wants to play, but part of me wonders whether that decision of that darkness retreat was to discover whether or not he still can, meaning physically, because nobody knows their own body better than themselves, right? No player knows what's going on than themselves. Meaning a player could have an injury, not tell anyone, and say, I'm gonna play through this, and no way is somebody else gonna take this from me. And a part of me wonders and knows, well, I know that Aaron Rodgers is that guy that would play hurt, would play through an injury, and would want to be out there as he was for Green Bay for, 15 years, 16 years in a row. So granted, he missed some time here and there, but would always come back sooner than anticipated. And in that regard, I greatly admire Aaron Rodgers for that. But now at the age of 40, with the expectations on him with a franchise that, as I alluded to, hasn't had a quarterback in 40, 50 years, those expectations are expecting a guy to do what he did at 30 to 35 when he's 40. And I think a lot of us are spoiled in the sense to what we saw with Tom Brady, especially, to where he had barn burner seasons in Tampa Bay in his mid 40s. So I don't think anybody's going to be able to do that again. And I think it's going to show us that once again, there's only one Tom Brady, and Aaron Rodgers is not Tom Brady. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is even Peyton Manning. And I've even said this, my dad and I, my father and I have had conversations about whether or not Aaron Rodgers is even Brett Favre. And I say it, the stats are way better for Aaron Rodgers. What he's done, statistically is phenomenal. But in terms of that type of guy, you guys know what I mean by that. That type of leader, that type of gridiron legend, I don't think Aaron Rodgers is I don't see that with Aaron Rodgers. I see a very, very talented guy. I see one of probably the best passers, just pure flick of the wrist throwers of the football that I have ever seen. Probably since Dan Marino, to be quite honest with you, that could throw the football as clean and as quick as Aaron Rodgers can with the arm strength that looks effortless, right? But I just think the Jets are expecting way too much, and I get it. They're going to expect way too much, but I think when you expect too much, you find yourself severely disappointed. And granted, I like Robert Saleh a lot. I think their defense is very good. Did have some moments where it was bend but don't break. And I would anticipate that the Jets are much better this year with Aaron Rodgers, healthy. But I think that's a huge question. Will he stay healthy? I think, and to me, I don't want to not answer your question, Kyle, but it's tough for me to answer it when he's 40 and he's already come up lame in OTAs, and maybe that's a sign of things to come. Maybe that's a forecast of what to expect that's not good, right? So, that's how I see that. And I think that that's a very fair assessment. I hope for the sake of the Jets fans that he is healthy, that they are able to set out what they're looking to do with a healthier Aaron Rodgers, and the result of that could go either way, whether he's healthy or not. Let's just say he is healthy. Do I think that the Jets are good enough to win a Super Bowl? I don't think so. I really don't. I think a big factor that changed the dynamic of Rodgers in Green Bay was Devontae Adams leaving to go to the Raiders. And I think a big factor that changes Rodgers from Green Bay to the Jets is the fact that the Jets are talented. They're young. Garrett Wilson, I really like him a lot. I drafted him in every fantasy draft that I could last year. I loved him in college out of the Ohio State, but I really think there's a big disparity there in talent as of right now between Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson. I don't think I'm crazy or off putting anybody by saying that. That Garrett Wilson is just not what Devontae Adams is right now. It doesn't mean he can't be. Maybe Aaron Rodgers can elevate the stock of Garrett Wilson, but I just don't know. I really don't. I really question. I see a sense of dysfunction with the Jets that has always been there to an extent. No matter who the coach is, no matter who the owner is, it's like this dark dysfunctional cloud just kind of hangs over the franchise. And the hesitation from Aaron Rodgers to question whether he can or shouldn't play, I think, is really telling. Whether the fact that he actually did play or not, the fact that he even hesitated kind of says a lot about where he's at. I think this is a one and done move that saw the Jets give up quite a lot to mortgage their future for a guy that might only be there for one season. And that's not a smart move. And what's a very interesting move is the fact that they bring in Aaron Rodgers. They let Mike White go, who was a warrior for that team, and Zach Wilson is still there. Maybe they did try to keep Mike White as was reported, but clearly they didn't want to pay him what Miami did, which wasn't much. So if Aaron Rodgers goes down, you're right back there with the Zach Wilson train, and nobody wants to hop on that. I don't even think Zach Wilson wants to hop back on the Zach Wilson train. I think he's ready to just sit his ass on the bench and call it a day, as his confidence is completely destroyed and his talent was not evolved upon, developed rather, and his talent was ever so much in the first place. So I remember going back, to that draft class. I was really it just abundantly clear that if the New York Jets draft Zach Wilson second overall, it's one of the worst draft picks in recent memory. And they did, and they passed on Zach. They passed on, pardon me, they took Zach Wilson and passed on Justin Fields, which I thought was a massive mistake. And not only that, could have probably traded down to get Justin Fields anyway, because he fell a little bit. Mac Jones, Alabama, obviously did some big things there. I don't think Mac Jones is that great, but he's certainly a hell of a lot better than Zach Wilson. And then the Jets are going to be playing the draft the quarterback game once Aaron Rodgers is gone, because Zach Wilson's not it. He's not him. He's not the guy. So I'm ready to say that. I am ready to say that. And the Jets are not. They're putting out statements like, well, Aaron Rodgers is going to help Zach develop. They're done with Zach Wilson. Let's cut the bullshit. They're done with Zach Wilson. They're not moving forward with him at all. And if they do, it's a mistake. Again, a mistake. Zach Wilson is not a good quarterback. So going to that, Kyle, I think the Jets will be much better. I don't know if they will make the playoffs, but I think they'll be much better. So in regards to this, Kyrie Demos said, just sending in my Tim's order. Kyrie Demos said, what's a sleeper team from each conference that you think is going to ball out this year? All right, so let's go. Let me go to the NFC conference, because I know who my team is. I know who my team is that I'm rooting for in the A. Not that I'm rooting for, but I know the sleeper team that I would be rooting for here. I know the sleeper team that I'd be rooting for here in the NFC. Or in the AFC. I'm sorry, pardon me. In the AFC, I know who that sleeper team is. Actually, and I know who that team is in the NFC as well, as I just looked at it. So, believe it or not, I never thought I'd say this in my lifetime, especially because both of these teams have been hot garbage. So, both of these teams have been hot garbage in my lifetime. And both of those teams, I think, have turned a massive corner as far as development and drafting, coaching, just all around. So the team that I believe is going to be a scary team in the AFC that nobody's really talking about is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And everybody can kind of collectively chuckle as I say that, because again, they're the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I watched that game last season, and that game I'm referring to, of course, is the Chiefs and the Jaguars. I watched the whole thing. And there was a moment in that game, the moment of that game was Trevor Lawrence thrown to the right sideline. I'm a big Trevor Lawrence guy. I really like him a lot. Trevor Lawrence to the right sideline, throwing it to the receiver who ends up getting hurt. And he's pulled, and you have obviously he's pulled, and you have Jamal Agnew coming in, right? Jamal Agnew comes in, and then Jamal Agnew fumbles the ball. Had that not happened, Jacksonville very well could have beaten the Kansas City Chiefs, which would have changed, obviously, everything in the AFC. Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, rock steady, head coach, general manager. It was egregious that Doug Peterson was fired from Philly, even though Sirianni obviously turned it around, and they're doing really well, and they're probably going to be back in the Super Bowl in Philly, of course. But Doug Peterson's a good coach, great offensive play caller, coming from the Andy Reid coaching tree, and Trevor Lawrence is very, very talented. He's very good. And not only that, they get Calvin Ridley back, coming off of a suspension last year for gambling and all that stuff. And not only that, Travis Etienne is in the backfield there, and he's very good as well. I like what Jacksonville has done these last few seasons, and their defense, the defense of Josh Allen leading the way. I like their team a lot. I think that they're very talented. They're young, they're hungry, and they got a lot of good talent there. As far as the NFC team that I think that could be a sleeper, I will say this with zero hesitation. The Detroit Lions. I love what the Detroit Lions are doing. I love Dan Campbell. I'd run through a brick wall if I was playing for Dan Campbell. Hard Knocks kind of told a lot about what they're trying to do in Detroit that I think is actually pretty special. They're creating a solid base of a team that is from within and obviously spreads throughout that locker room. They got a lot of young, hungry players, and they've built that team almost like a college team. And I think that that is actually going to benefit them. And I love what they did in this year's draft. Every single writer out there, I haven't seen one that's been complimentary of the fact that the Detroit Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell, but those were two of my favorite prospects in this draft, regardless as to whether or not where they should have drafted those guys. Each team has 32 different boards as to how they rank players. And the Detroit Lions believed that those were two of their highest players on their board. And they have every reason to fill those holes on their team with two players that are pretty good. So those were two holes on their roster, running back and middle linebacker. And for those of you that question my statement in saying that, well, running back wasn't really a big hole for them. It was. If you watched Hard Knocks, they did not like DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift did not show up in between the ears for the Detroit Lions. Just didn't have it. And maybe that'll change in Philly. But he just was not understanding the offense, didn't have the work ethic rather that they wanted. And furthermore, Jamal Williams goes to the Saints. He ran for a gazillion touchdowns for Detroit last year. He leaves, goes to the Saints. And you bring in David Montgomery, who I'm a big fan of, who I really like. But he's had his own injury issues. And then Jameson Williams, he gets thrown into his own gambling scandal, a wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. So you had to replace all of those guys, in a sense, with someone as far as a player that could actually do all of those things that those guys could do. Jahmyr Gibbs is that guy. He's a good player, has the ability to be a great player. And then Jack Campbell is like a throwback to what Detroit has actually been doing these last few years, running the football, turnover-free passing game, safe passing games, and going from there. Go from there. Jared Goff was phenomenal last year, I thought. And I really like what they're doing. I believe in it. I see what they're doing, and I look at it from top to bottom, and I say I believe in what the Detroit Lions are doing right now. Dan Campbell's on the books there for another, I think, 4 more years. And I think he's going to get an extension. I think at some point that team is going to hit, and they're going to be good. They're going to be good. I really believe. I can't believe I'm saying that. And yeah, the Detroit Lions have never been good. They've never been good, at least in my lifetime. But I think that they're going to get. I think they are going to get good. I think they're going to get much better. And I expect Jared Goff to have another good year. I like what they have there. I'm on Ron St. Brown coming out of nowhere, as a top flight receiver. The story of that team is really amazing, really awesome. Jared Goff was traded, obviously, in the Stafford trade. He gets a little bit of a revival on his career with Detroit. I think the run game is going to be dynamic with Montgomery and Gibbs. I really like what they've done. Their defense should be better. They do have I'm Aiden Hutchinson. I was blanking on his name, but Aiden Hutchinson's a player that I really like as well. They got a lot of young talent, and they like to play hard. They really do. Offensively, they're physical. Defensively, they're physical. I think that was one of the reasons why Von Miller got hurt in that game, was just because of the fact that Detroit throws everybody around, or at least tries to. So to answer Kyrie's question, I think the Lions and the Jaguars are the two teams that I would be rooting for. All right. So next question is asked by Dean Thomas, my dad. So he says, and I've echoed these sentiments. He said, when you have a GM who says draft, train slash build and extend, how does that work with a coach that doesn't like to play rookies? Oddly enough, I'm listening to One Bills Live yesterday in the middle of the day, and they're talking about the rookie talent that they've had on these teams as rookies these last 2 years. Who have they had as rookies that are maybe coming off of a rookie season or just rookies these last few years? Or do they have their rookies heading into this season? Of course, we know Kincaid. Last season was Kyer Elam. And I want to talk about Kyer Elam when answering this question because watching him last season, knowing that the last probably 6-7 weeks of the season that he was actually the best corner on the team, and then wondering why was he not out there sooner? Why was Benford in his spot? Why was he scratched, healthy, scratched for a week? We have not received the answer to that question quite yet. But more than anything, the one guy that really ticks me off that didn't get the playing time that I felt like he earned in training camp when it is blazing hot in Rochester at that time of year. I'm there and I am sweating head to toe just sitting there. And these guys are running 4.40s on the gridiron, practicing, getting hit, full pads. Obviously, right? It's extremely hot for those guys at that time of year, and yet you have rookies busting their behinds to try to make the team and make an impact. And the one guy that I thought more than anybody in that class last year that deserved a shot to get legitimate playing time was Khalil Shakir. And I thought the way they handled Khalil Shakir last year was absolutely terrible in every meaning of the word. He busted his hump to make the team. He was their best quote unquote slot receiver, and yet they went with a position battle with Isaiah McKenzie and Jamison Crowder instead. They'd rather see those two guys battle for that spot than a rookie. Then Jamison Crowder gets hurt. Isaiah McKenzie is not Cole Beasley. He's not a true slot guy. He's more of actually a vertical threat, even for a short height receiver. He is a guy that can stretch the field. And he would admit that himself, as he did in a recent interview with my buddy Tyler Dunn. And Khalil Shakir was that guy that they could have put in that slot, and yet they didn't. And even worse than that, not only did they pass on Khalil Shakir once, twice, a few times over, they passed on him to go back into the well of getting two players that were retired in Cole Beasley and John Brown, or out of the NFL at the very least. Cole Beasley was retired, John Brown just out of the league, of course, as a free agent. They went down that road with two guys that they knew that didn't work the first time or wasn't going to work now more than ever due to the fact that those guys were past their prime. But they went down that road again. And there were rumors that Allen asked for that. I don't know if those rumors are fact. But I do know that Allen was throwing his hands up in the air like, what the hell? Like, give me the talent. Whatever talent we have, give it to me. And they wouldn't. They would not give him Khalil Shakir. And as the season wore on, when it was apparent that Beasley and Brown were coming back, then they did come back, and they weren't playing up to the standard that they used to. That's when Khalil Shakir actually finally got his shot and showed what he could do. And it was startling for me every single week to not see Khalil Shakir out there and see him come up with clutch catch after clutch catch, and he'd be 1 for 34 yards, 2 for 50 yards. That has to change. This whole dynamic of rookies having to earn their way out onto the field. If you draft a tight end in the first round, you bet your ass he should be out there. If you draft a corner out of the SEC who lined up against anybody and everybody that's been a first-round draft pick wide receiver the last 4 years, you bet your ass he should be out there. If you draft a dynamic, sure route running receiver that falls to you in the 5th round that draft analysts and scouts say, wow, the Bills got a hidden gem there in the 5th round, and you don't play him to bring back 33, 34-year-old wide receivers? Shame on you. That was terrible. And I hope this year, more than anything, that changes. I don't care what offense they run. We know it's going to be high pace, right? But no matter what offense they run, this whole analogy that rookies have to earn their way onto the field, I can't stand that. I am completely against it, as are a lot of the teams in the NFL, including the Kansas City Chiefs, who won the Super Bowl last year with 7 rookie defensive starters and a rookie running back. Case closed on that. And that kind of goes into the next question that Dean asks. He says, if you draft a running back with your 2nd-round pick after using a 3rd-round pick on a running back for the 2nd time in 4 years, a 3rd time in 4 years, they used a running back. They used a draft choice on a running back because they took Devin Singletary in the 3rd of I can't remember what draft that was, but let's just say they took Devin Singletary in the 3rd round one year. They took Zach Moss in the 3rd round in another, and then they took James Cook in the 2nd round, in another year, obviously a year later, or maybe 2 years later. But I mean, and that's another. I mean, then you would have to look at who's evaluating that. Why did we come up short on that? Who do we fire? And that could be a valid discussion for sure. When I look at the running backs and how they've been picked these last few years, I think everybody this year was just completely frustrated over the fact that we had that fact of the rookie running backs. But when I look at the rookie, what I was going at is, I lost my train of thought. But when I look at the rookie running backs that have been drafted these last few years, Bijan Robinson's somebody that everybody's like, oh my God, I cannot believe the Atlanta Falcons drafted Bijan Robinson 8th overall. When you're the Atlanta Falcons and you have very little talent on your offense, drafting a running back in the top 10 is not a big stretch. It should not be a big stretch. When that rookie running back is Bijan Robinson, wait till you see what this kid can do. Just wait. And I will not mince words when I say he's one of the best running backs I've seen come out of the draft in the last 10 years since Adrian Peterson. I am fully willing, ready, and able to throw that claim out there. But what I'm getting at is with James Cook, this has to be the keys to the car, right? This has to be what gets the engine running. James Cook. It just has to be. He has to be featured in this offense this year. We need to see it. I know Damian Harris is going to be somebody that Bills fans are going to really love, especially as I alluded to. He's a bruiser. He is a guy that November, December, January, God willing, February, if they make it that far, he's going to be somebody that's going to be very good for them. But they need James Cook to be featured in this offense. He needs to see touches. And I think that's going to be key. So I did get some questions from a good buddy of mine, Rob Mullen. He asked me quite a few questions in regards to the training camp, as well as worries and such. So wrapping up the show with Rob's questions, he says, hey, Ryan, as training camp draws near, do you see the Bills making any big free agent moves, such as adding D-Hop, or are we pretty much set in that regard for 2023 and 2024? Great question, Rob. So I was all aboard the bring in DeAndre Hopkins train. I was all in for that. I love D-Hop. I think he's a great player, and I've obviously I want to put it mildly in this sense, but I've had him on many fantasy teams. We'll just put it that way. I'm a big fan. Would have made the offense completely, fully dynamic in ways that I would just only dream of, to be honest. But I think that ship is either sailed or sailing. I feel like the time and place for that now should have already happened. Doesn't mean it can't happen potentially later once D Hop is, obviously at a point, trade deadline, trade bait, potentially when Arizona's 0-8 or 0-10, and they just need to sell the whole kitchen cupboard. But that could be when it happens. I wanted it to happen prior to the draft. It didn't. And I think they wanted it to happen prior to the draft too, and it didn't. Then they went into the draft thinking that they'd take a receiver. They couldn't do that. They ended up taking the best tight end in the draft. And it was a position that, obviously they've wanted to add to, as we've talked about before. So that's how I see that. I think it can potentially happen still, but it probably won't be until the trade deadline as far as a trade for D-Hop. Maybe some free agents there. We did see them bring in Latavius Murray, which is interesting. I think that shows that they're, committed to run the football a little bit more, at least seeing that through. And my biggest concern for the Bills heading into the regular season is just to stay healthy. That's a big concern of mine, their ability to stay healthy. I am concerned about Trey White a little bit. I've talked about my willingness to kind of put out the feelers and see what they could get for him via trade, what that would look like. There's a lot of particulars to that, but I worry that the best of Trey White has already been seen pre that ACL injury. I hope I'm wrong on that. I really do. I hope I'm wrong on that, but I am a little bit worried on that front as well. So we'll see what happens there. And lastly, last question of the show, with Leslie Frazier publicly bowing out for the 2023-2024 season, a private firing within the inner circles at One Bills Drive, or is there some truth to Leslie needing a break? I actually think it's a bigger picture than both of these reasons. I think Leslie Frazier was kind of sick and tired of the system that is the NFL, or lack thereof, that does not allow African American or minority coaches to become head coaches. And there is validity, there is truth to that. And for anyone to deny that, I think you'd be ignorant at this point. I mean, it's almost laughably bad at the amount of coaches that get chances that are either retread coaches that have proven that they're failures as a head coach in comparison to a younger, greener assistant coach that might be a minority, of African American, Native American. There's so many different cultures in coaching, and that's what makes this game great. And some of the best coaches that I've played for, or some of the best mentors that I've had, come from all different backgrounds. And one of my favorite movies of all time, Remember the Titans, obviously caters to that whole thought process of we're a team, we're all equal, and I feel like the NFL does not practice what they preach in that regard. And I think Leslie Frazier was just sick and tired of that, sick and tired of coaching year in, year out, having success, and not even being considered for a head coaching job. So he probably thought, well, if I'm not even going to be considered for a head coaching job after the success that I've had here, why even bother? And I don't blame him in that sense. I think a lot of people are thinking that it's about him and the Bills. Sean McDermott wanted him there. Brandon Beane wanted him there. Whether we disagree with that or not, they wanted him there. I think Leslie Frazier just not only needed a break in what he had been through here, but needed a break from what the NFL does not provide as equal opportunity to all coaches. And I've been pretty firm on that stance, and I will not back down from it. I hope that there is a point in time where Eric Bieniemy is a head coach. That's been long overdue. The guy's won multiple Super Bowls as an OC for the Kansas City Chiefs. He goes from being the OC of the Kansas City Chiefs to the OC/assistant head coach of the Washington Commanders. It's ridiculous. It honestly is ridiculous. And outside of guys like Mike Tomlin, those are really the only guys that have been able to receive a willing chance that gives each and every year. Not every guy is that fortunate. So definitely something to talk about there in regards to that. With that being said, wraps up the hour-long Thomas Take Sports Podcast NFL TGIF Q&A. Thanks for tuning in.